Welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, I'm joined by the Executive Director of State Power Caucus, Margie Del Castillo. Their organization is currently focusing on work that goes beyond mobilization to build lasting governing power at the state level across the country, and we talk about what that looks like in different states these days. But first, these headlines. A lot has happened since the last time we did a headline read on this show. Whether it's Pete Hegseth's Patton cosplay, or the refocus of Trump's military deployments to Portland, the government shutdown, or the violent overreach of ICE agents in Chicago, there's a laundry list of things that I could be talking about today. Some days feel like whole weeks in themselves, and looking at any one of these headlines independently is a little mind-numbing. But if taken together, I can't help but speculate about how people are understanding this moment. Because our work here on the show is to pick out threads of meaning and tug on them. This is all really frightening and disturbing, and much of it has some real material impacts, aside from all the thunder and bluster and memes and whatever. I also think that it shows the depth of grasping fragility that this administration is currently wallowing in. What felt like an overwhelming but purposeful blitzkrieg of chaos in the first 100 days is starting to look a little more like desperate grasping at straws to maintain a base of support while enacting a horrifically ugly and damaging agenda. There's an opportunity here for a narrative intervention about how cartoonish this overreach is, and that it really has a very low ceiling of support. Trump's approval ratings are, in fact, at an all-time low this month, according to Marquette polling. So who's going to seize this opportunity? In the meantime, Speaker Mike Johnson refuses to seat newly elected Arizona member of Congress, Adelita Grijalva. Johnson was quick to swear in 2 Republican members elected in special elections, and he's indicated as of Friday, that's today, that he'll do it the week of the 6th, which is next week. But Grijalva's staff has said that they're learning about this stuff through the media just like you and me, which is wild. On Thursday, the Israeli Navy once again illegally detained hundreds of activists on the Samud flotilla, once again heading to Palestine with nothing more than food and other humanitarian aid. This 40-boat flotilla, much larger than similar efforts earlier this summer, included more than 450 activists from 57 different countries, who all remain in detention as of recording Friday morning. Among those detained also include some Convergence contributors, like musician Carsey Blanton, who provides the soundtrack for the Anti-Authoritarian podcast, and David Adler, who has appeared as a guest on some of our shows. I'll share here Adler's own words from his final public message before being seized by Israeli forces. When Israeli authorities forcibly board our vessels in the coming hours, please know that they will be committing an act of piracy. They will be violating the sovereignty of the seas. They will be obstructing a peaceful humanitarian mission witnessed by the entire world. Let them try to justify it. Let them explain to the international community why our humble effort to feed the starving people of Gaza represents some threat to their national security. No one will believe them. The Hasbara simply doesn't hit anymore. Solidarity with all of those who are detained and all of those who are still suffering in Gaza. If you'd like to learn more about the flotilla activist status and call on their governments to demand their release, you can learn more at globalsamudflotilla.org. Finally, I regret to report that Atlanta area journalist Mario Guevara, whose 100-day detention by ICE we've covered extensively over the past months, is likely being deported back to El Salvador as we record this morning. Guevara was the model immigrant that bad faith actors on the right constantly allege that they want. He was working, he had no criminal record, he was going through the long and arduous green card process, and they detained and deported him anyway. This is a blow to free speech, it's a blow to the freedom of the press, and really our hearts go out to his friends and family who were not even able to say goodbye to him face to face.
Hi, this is Josh Elstro, the senior multimedia producer here at Convergence Magazine. That means I have the privilege of working on all the audio and video projects that you see coming from Convergence day in and day out. I hope you'll consider becoming a member of Convergence. We're a small independent operation and rely heavily on our readers and listeners just like you to support this work. You can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. You'll find a direct link to that in the show notes, of course. Monthly and annual memberships start at just $10 a month, or you can even make a one-time donation. Any amount helps build a better independent media ecosystem, one that supports people's movements while opposing fascism. But at $10 monthly and above, you get access to exclusive subscriber content and events. If you can't afford anything right now, don't worry, our shows and print content are always going to be free for you to enjoy. You could still help by leaving a podcast review, following on Instagram, or even subscribing to our YouTube. Thanks for listening.
State Power Caucus is a multi-state organizing project primarily focused on the build aspect of block and build strategy. They do this by supporting state-based organizations in the process of moving from short-term mobilization into consistent state-based infrastructure, leadership pipelines, and co-governance capacity. By bringing organizations together to think about their long-term goals, they build alignment and share skills to strengthen our movements in the long run. My guest today is the Executive Director of State Power Caucus, Margie Del Castillo. We spoke a few weeks ago and got into the nuts and bolts of what this form of power building requires, with a particular eye to her home state of Virginia. I think the conversation is instructive for anyone hungry to think about where we go from here and transform resistance into long-term strategy. Margie, thank you so much for making the time to join me today.
Thanks, Kaden. It's good to be with you.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about State Power Caucus, your approach to the work that you do, and the kind of like ecosystem that you're building?
Yeah. So we like to call ourselves a non-network network. Basically, we're a formation of state-based grassroots organizations that are building durable political power from the ground up. So that's in localities and cities, counties, all with an eye towards building state power. And that changes for every state because every state is unique and different. But another thing about the State Power Caucus is that we are a 50-state strategy. So we are not about picking cute states or the right states to be in or this particular thing or whatever. It's more that we believe that we need to build durable power across the country and every terrain that we can be in, because our people, like, who make up a multiracial, multi-issue democracy, are everywhere. So we need to build everywhere. So we are not in all 50 states as of yet, but we are in states that range from like Washington State to Oregon to Virginia, Florida. So we represent all across the country. We're about 24 organizations across 18 states right now. And really our space is where people come to take a step out of the day-to-day and really look at the big picture and what it means to build durable power. We don't run campaigns, so we're not coming in like a top-down approach to our organization saying, hey, we need to do a housing campaign or we need to do this. We know and trust that like the SPC member organizations know what their communities need and want, and most of them are working to build long-term agendas. But we really want to be a place to focus on the long haul for them, where they can come out again out of that day-to-day and just be like, yes, elections, those kind of things matter, but power ultimately comes from sustained power building and base building, and building our leaders, right, and building our capacity towards governing, and not just mobilizing for elections or mobilizing for a particular issue, which nothing wrong with that. It's more of like a both and approach. And in our space, it's all about the long haul and the big picture.
Cool. Yeah, that's super helpful. Can we dig a little bit into this phrase that you used a couple times, which is durable power? Like, what does that mean to you? How do you measure it? And like, what is sort of the like way that you think about gaining and then using power?
Yeah. It's a great question. And admittedly, it's a newer concept for us, something that we've been through our experimentation in our base building working group, which a lot of our organizations are a part of. We really started this project probably like 5 to 6 years ago to really dig into what our bases looked like and really be honest about the power that we had built thus far, right? Answering like, key questions around elections, right? Like, why are we losing some people to the right, right? Like, why is our message not sticking? Like, how is our base ultimately is not big enough to meet the moment, right? To shift the balance of power that we need. And so in our working group and in many spaces like this across the country, like we've been digging in, and our groups have been really honest with each other about, okay, we may say we have a mailing list of like thousands and thousands of people, but ultimately we got like 300 people that come to things consistently, right? And that's the actual base. And that's the number that actually has to increase to be able to build the governing power that we need at the end of the day, which for like several states, right? Like that's a long-term project. Like that's a governing power for a state like Florida, Texas, that's coming decades in the future, but doesn't mean we don't need to do the work to do it now, right? We have to build for the future. And so what we did by digging in and being really honest with each other about what our bases looked like was to be able to be like, okay, here is actually the power that we have. Here's like the scale that we can like impact. And a lot of that discovery was that we're making really good impact locally in counties and cities. If we really want to play at a state level, we're going to need this amount, right? And so we've been working really the past couple of years to like redefine power building for ourselves. We've latched onto this concept of durable power because it's not just about having enough power, it's about having the power to last for the decades that we need for when we are governing in our particular states. And then also when we lose that ability to govern, right? When we're in this kind of defensive period, like more of the block part of the block and build, right? Which our states have gone through. Virginia is a really good example of that, where like we, won a trifecta, and I'm in Virginia, so I can say we won a trifecta in 2019. I was a part of that work here locally. And, 4 years later, we lost power, right? And so the past few years here in Virginia has been about protecting what we won with an eye towards like, well, what do we do when we win again, right? What did we learn the first time? And doing that kind of assessing and growing, strengthening our organizations, building the right infrastructure inside our organizations and outside of them to be able to like have really good impact when we are in power again, right? So like that's really a lot of the thinking behind durable power. And admittedly, it's still like a concept we're like defining and growing, but it's something that it's hitting with a lot of our organizations and membership because we're in this for the long haul. Like this project that we have, right? It's going to take a really long time to achieve. So,
yeah. And I think that, one of the threads that strikes me to like pull out of what you just said is that durable power is not necessarily in opposition to like turning out big numbers, whatever, but it is like, there's like a deeper layer there that's below kind of like conventional wisdom about basically what amount to vanity metrics for organizations. And that like actually looking at what you can do with those numbers it's a more interesting conversation for those of us who are interested in like winning. It might not necessarily be as interesting a conversation for like the people who fund that work.
Yeah. Well, and let's be real, right? Like a lot of that was for funders, right? A lot of it was to be like, yes, we have a mailing list of 20,000 people, but ultimately we didn't have 20,000 people who were going to turn out and canvas, right? Or like do X action, right? So like we needed to be real about what that looked like. And then, decide like based on where people were leadership wise, like how do we build them up even more? So it was really like an exciting opportunity to be real about the numbers, right? Like you're saying, and to be like, okay, now what? Now that we know our real impact at this moment, how can we grow it more?
Yeah, I'm also interested in, with regards to the durable power piece, it seems to me like there's a clear through line from that to then thinking about state level politics as opposed to national politics. Is that a challenge that you face? Is that like, or does it feel more like an opportunity when you're working at a more local level with folks?
Yeah, I think it's more of an opportunity, right? Because like, especially, whether you're working in Chicago, whether you're working in Virginia that has the Dillon rule, which is like, basically impedes localities from making a lot of like impactful legislation. Everything has to go through the state level. The state ultimately comes into the picture, right? Like you can do a lot locally and then you hit this kind of roadblock where you're like, oh shit, like they can actually go at the state legislature and undo everything we just did, right? Or we can only do so much. We could send like a proclamation or a letter, but we can't actually change the legislation. And so I think our folks, as much as they've been like digging in locally, have always had the eye to the state level and have actually been very focused. I think that's one thing that a lot of the organizations in the caucus have in common is their allegiance and focus on state level and not as much trying to let the national distract, because truly in the last 8 years, right, in these two like Trump administrations, it's been distraction. And not to say that like it hasn't impacted our people. It has, right? Very real life impacts. But it's also taken our attention away from like the work that we're trying to do day in and day out on the ground level where people are feeling even more immediate impacts, right? So like, yes, there's an importance of like paying attention to each of the levels, but our folks are very clear-eyed, like the North Star is state level power.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I do think that the other thing is that, like, if you are not in the state level work, it is easy to get kind of swept away by national politics too. That, like, the inverse is also true, that, like, there's like a thing out there that feels a lot bigger than like the thing that you can impact immediately in your community in a different way. So
yeah, and it's what you typically see, like, even in your evening news, right? Like, all the coverage is like national, and there might be a little blip about something that passed at your county level or whatever that is actually going to impact your kids and their schools, and, like, all the things that you go through, or your garbage truck coming through the area, right? They're going to privatize the garbage truck companies. Like, there's a lot that impacts people daily that we still, like, our organizations, I think, still go when they're doing their door-to-door wraps, like, preaching that to people, right? Like, you need to pay attention to what's happening right here.
Yeah, I mean, just like thinking about that from we make national media perspective, I imagine there's also like an information disconnect that you all have to fill around, I tell people this all the time, that there's two local outlets here in the Bay that I give monthly money to. And one of them is I give $5 a month to this guy who just literally goes to every city council meeting and reports on it. And, like, that's the state of local media, right? It's like,
it's dire. Yeah. I actually do something very similar here in my county.
But it's wild, because it's like it's not news that you can get in a newspaper. It's not news that you can get on the TV. And that, like, I imagine that that's a huge barrier for the work that y'all are trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, SPC organizations, like, are base builders ultimately, right? They build base, they interact with people on a daily basis. So they're trusted messengers for their people. And they're the leading, like, experts in a lot of the issues that impact people. And so, they're going also, like, door knocking year round, right? They're not just doing election time work. Like, elections might be an electoral work, might be something that our groups do have in common, but it's more of like a tool to use in, like, that everyday, all year round box of work with the community. And yeah, in the age of misinformation and disinformation, like, it's more important than ever to have, like, trusted sources in the community, like your local organizer that, like, is giving you the real information.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk about some concretes. Can you tell a story about what building durable state power has looked like in practice? Yeah, and, like, drilling down into any number of the states that you all are working in.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with Virginia, not to be so special about Virginia, but I think they're unique in that, they were a red state, right? We've been a red state for a really long time. We're decidedly purple at this point, I would say. And, New Virginia Majority in particular has been organizing for over 20 years across the state. And through, like, that organizing, issues surface, right? And that's, like, a good base building organization is always going to take their direction from the people and from the day-to-day work that they're doing. And so people started surfacing the issue of, like, I have a felony and I can't vote. A very real issue, right? And this issue started surfacing, like I said, a long time ago. But as the opportunity came to potentially have a trifecta, to have power in 2019, New Virginia Majority saw, like, the opportunity to start building some alliances that you would need to be able to, like, navigate the current administration, which was, like, very hostile, right? Prior to 2019. And I know, because I worked in the legislature for many years before that in Virginia, I like to say, like, we were seeing the authoritarian conditions, like, real time in red states before everybody else kind of came aware of it with the arrival of Trump and everything. Like, this was already happening before, right? Like, because we know that Trump didn't create authoritarianism. Like, the seeds have been planted for a long time. And so we were facing a lot of those impacts in Virginia. And surfacing an issue like this, like in 2012, 2013 was, like, very unheard of. But what New Virginia Majority started doing was, like, just going to kind of unlikely allies and building alliances around this issue of, like, how can we simplify the restoration process? Because the process to restore people's right to vote was very complicated on purpose, right? So that it would not be easy for people to be able to get their vote back. So essentially folks are being denied their right to vote. And one of the key pieces of things they did along the way, along, like, this multi-year journey, was their electoral endorsements. They were building in this issue into that. So as they were doing, like, candidate questionnaires and surveys, interviews of people, right, they were, like, do you support the right to restore, like the right to vote, right? And using that as governing leverage for when these folks got into office. So being able to make that tie from like, we're going to endorse a candidate and we're going to win. And then we're going to think about what do they do after they win? Because that's really like a lot of what's missing still across the country is like progressives do a lot to elect people, but there's sometimes not a lot of planning about what happens after that, right? And there's like real-time learnings happening in Chicago with Mayor Brandon Johnson. Ideally, you know, if Mom Donnie wins in New York, right, that there'll be more lessons to learn on that on the progressive side, which is really exciting. But New Virginia Majority was kind of like ahead of the curve back then, right? Thinking about how do we govern and how do we slip, you know, this issue in, right? And make it important to people when they are in office. So that was like kind of the inside piece. And then the outside piece was like, how do we get ready to register tons of people once these rights are restored, right? Like, how do we defend the win? So starting to imagine what it looks like to win, which I think sometimes we're also afraid to do, you know, like we're afraid to be like, well, God, if we do have power or if we do win, like, what could that look like? How would we do the work? And I think that sometimes like that can impede us from actually doing the work to win, right? Because we've been in the defensive postures as progressives, I think, and as the left for like so long. Because of the right's ability to organize and win for like these past 40 years, right? Like I do get it. And I think that's why places like, you know, say Power Caucus are like really important because we help people lift out of the day-to-day defensive and be able to envision like what wins look like. And so that's what New Virginia Majority was doing, right? And they knew that like there was going to be court attacks and like all these things following the win of rights restoration. So it wasn't just about like policy advocacy either, right? Like they knew it wasn't just going to end there. There was going to be a court battle. So they helped to design, they helped to staff, they helped to defend this win even after the fact, and turned, you know, had also like a messaging component to it to start educating the broader public about what it meant to do this, helping like the governors, because there was like multiple governors that overlapped this whole fight, right? Understand why this is a win that they should claim and support. And so ultimately, like the big lesson in their story is like, we don't just fight for policy. We're like getting ready to govern and make it actually real for people, right? Like what happens after we elect the candidate, after we win the policy, how do we implement it? How do we keep it and make it stay for long? And I think their rights restoration process, like I could say a lot more, but like that is one really good example of something that has stuck through like a really hard past few years that we've had.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me really about that story is also just that like the rights restoration policy is something that like requires then people to do like even barring the judicial branch challenges, that like in order to make this thing real for people, in order to make it something that has like a demonstrable effect on communities, there need to be people out there ready to like go out and register people to vote and like do that kind of like, I don't know, like sort of like boots on the ground kind of like basic stuff that, you know, I think one thing that we see time and time again is like a progressive policy or maybe a watered down version of progressive policy gets passed, but then it doesn't get like the institutional support it needs to be like a real win. And also like having decision makers own that win feels big too, that like there's a piece of this that is both about the longer term story, but also about like, how do we make people see that their activity and their advocacy led to something meaningful in their community? And like that kind of protagonism just feels so hard to capture.
Yeah, it is. And we've seen, you know, like on our side and like even within the Democratic Party, it's been hard to claim, right? Like the wins and like the progress that's been made. But I think like, you know, SPC went through a process with the Grassroots Power Project, where we did like a year in-depth kind of learning process towards what governing power meant. And that was right when I came on around 2021. And what it ended up being was really like just this political education space that we held with them to educate folks on what it actually takes to achieve governing power. And in the example of New Virginia Majority, right, it was about competing and being able to staff and like have, folks that knew what they were doing in multiple arenas of contestation, right? So it wasn't just like the legislature, it was also the judicial system, it was the outside organizing, it was the messaging. And you had to have people in all of those buckets who were all aligned on the same kind of North Star and goal and coordinating to achieve that win. And that's actually what it takes. And we haven't been doing that like as a left progressive movement, right? Because, so a lot of times we don't have the capacity, but I think it's also like we haven't known that we have to actually be prepared to be contesting in multiple spaces. And that's what that work with the Grassroots Power Project taught us, was like learning about all the different aspects, mapping out, like we talk a lot about power mapping, but sometimes that's just like one thing, like elected officials, like that's it.
Right.
But no, there's so much more within your county, within your state, whatever it looks like for your campaign, that you have to be aware of, where your win could be taken, or something could impede it in some way along the way. So I think that's been the project for us.
Yeah. Or it's like that power map ends up being a power map for the sort of like short-term sort of ladder goal, as opposed to the long-term thing. So it's like the players on the map are the same, but the way that you orient toward them might be different.
I think so. And realizing, another example, right? Like we have a group, Grassroots Collaborative, in Chicago, who is a really key integral part of like Mayor Brandon Johnson winning a few years later. They're going into year 3 of governing, and they're learning a lot, and we just held a convening on like co-governance and governing power in Minneapolis just a couple of weeks ago. And we had them there to talk about what they've learned. And one of the like things that was most insightful to me was like, what something where they were like, what would we do differently, is like actually find out what it looks like to work inside. Because like there's so many people, there's a whole nother map of people that we're not aware of, right, after we go in and have power, because we're not used to having it. We don't know like what it's really like, right? So, like, you have to go in and learn, and like, oh, there's all this staff, and they've probably overlapped many administrations, not just the last one, but like they've been there for a while, and you need to learn, build relationship with them, learn what their roles are, right? And how you're going to keep coordinated between the inside and the outside strategies. So it's a lot of work. And I'm not going to like say that it's, once you find all that out, that it's easy to just do, because it takes a lot of capacity. And our organizations at the end of the day are just like organizations, right? But I think that also lends itself to thinking like, what are like the united fronts and the alignments that we have to build as progressives in states, right? Because it's not just one organization that can build and win at the scale that we need to.
Totally. Yeah. And like a lot of the people who work within government, like they have their own culture. They also ultimately have their own politics and may need to be organized towards us.
Absolutely. It's another set of people to organize. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Chicago's also interesting because obviously, I mean, fairly recently, I think over the weekend, Donald Trump announced that he was not going to deploy the National Guard to Chicago, which seems like a huge short-term win and really a sign. I think there are a lot of people who are trying to interpret this sign or whatever, but I'm curious, that kind of thing feels so immediate and real and material. How do we hold that like short-term mobilization next to this sort of like long-term thing that you're describing? Because it feels so like it feels like often they are in contradiction, right? Even though maybe they're not, but like it feels like they are. And how do we balance those things?
I think it feels like we are because of, real like lack of capacity. Like that's a real thing. It can feel like they are, but I don't think that ultimately they are in against each other. It's such a both and we've just been, I think, as progressives, like been very trained to like mobilize, show up, right? Be in actions, be in the moment. Yeah. We've done a great job of turning out for various movement moments over the last like 8 years, because the passion and the drive was there, right? People saw something wrong and they went to the streets, and that's always going to continue. But then as an organizer, right? Like, which that's the heart of what all SPC members are, organizers. they're going to look at that and be like, well, what comes after? Like, what do we do with these people now that they've like gathered, right? What happens after the Women's March, right? Like what do all those people go and what do they work on in between those big moments? And for me, I'm like, you know, something like what happened with Chicago, I know that that's like a boost for their people, right? And that's kind of how you have to claim it, is those little wins is as a boost for folks that are in the long-term organizing, especially in a city that like Chicago that's so rich in their organizing infrastructure. I know that this is like a shot in the arm for them. Like, oh, like we needed this. And it helps give that energy as you move forward to the next thing. Cause we know it's not over. There's more stuff coming. Like there's more attacks, but I think people need that and we need to name it and like own it for our folks, right? So I know like some of our organizations, even when something like small happens, like they'll get their, you know, organizers will get their bases together and just have like a pizza party or something, right? Like something to celebrate the moment that just happened, because we have to inject joy into some of this stuff, right? Like it is just dire out there. We're seeing the consequences all the time. We're feeling them personally, not just seeing it, but actually it's happening to us and our families and friends. And so, you know, I claimed some of that joy when I saw that. When Mom Donnie won in New York, I claimed some of that joy for myself, even though I didn't do that work. But, you know, I cried that night because I was like, this is good. Like, this is the energy that we need to keep going, because it's a long road.
Yeah, and also I think so many of these things are like, oh, it's also possible to have some joy in a moment. And it's just like
I feel really committed to that, because like, and it's hard. I get it. You know, it is hard. It feels, you know, maybe like you're betraying something to like hold joy at times. But one of the things that I brought to SPC is like a thing around healing and joy, because I come from the reproductive justice movement before I was in this. And so repro justice has always been about the long term and like building towards like that future that we want, and knowing that we have to be okay in the long run for it. And so, you know, we have those aspects, and I've had to push because my folks are not, you know, our folks are not necessarily the ones who are going to put healing and stuff at the top and in the front of their work. But I've pushed because I know what's in front of us, and like we have to be okay to meet the moment.
Yeah.
We just do. So you got to take your breaks. You got to have joy, because it's also a privilege. You know, I feel like this work, you know, being on this podcast with you, like doing this stuff, it's a privilege to get to do this and like hopefully move forward like our vision for all our people. So
yeah, no, I feel that too. Like I mean, it's wild to me. Sometimes I say this to like my friends and stuff, that it's like wild to me that this is my full-time job, that like I get to steward this kind of storytelling and this kind of like basically public thinking that it feels like we need so much right now. And that like, I don't know, being able to like help people take a step back and look at this big picture is like, it is my act of service, you know. It's like, this is what we're here for.
Absolutely, it's important.
Yeah, and that's like clearly a component of like what it is going to take for our movements to win and govern effectively in the long term. What else have you seen from the work that you're like, oh, this is like a replicable thing that we'll need to use in our quest to change the way stuff works in our society?
Well, definitely like, you know, when I came into the State Power Caucus, it was formed by executive directors of state power organizations, which made a lot of sense. Those are the leaders, right?
Yeah, and they make the budget decisions, whatever.
Yeah, they make the decisions, they fundraise, they do all these things, and they recognize the problems that were coming for us, right? And so they formed the space. And as I came on, like part of my vision was also to bring in other leaders in these organizations, because so much falls to an executive director, right? Like they have so much on their plates. They're being asked to, you know, be in national spaces too and represent, you know, what is going on in Virginia, what's going on in New York, right? Speak for everything. And at the end of the day, we know like our movements are leaderful, right? Like there's more than one leader in the space. And so I really wanted like organizing directors and political directors in particular to come into our space and have a cohort of people to rely on. And so that's what we've really built over the past couple of years, has been like organizing directors, political directors, and the people really leading like the day-to-day work to come out of that once again and spend time together. And it's like it's a muscle that we have to keep building and flexing. And, you know, myself and my my teammates in the caucus team, like we do a lot of following up and a lot of pushing, like, you got to come to this convene, you got to come to this meeting, like, we're going to call you. We're like, organizing really these organizers.
Yeah.
To come into these spaces, because it's very hard to pull out of the day-to-day. It's very hard when your people are being like kidnapped by ICE, right? You're like doing all this stuff. You're trying to raise money for mutual aid. Like, you're doing so many things. It can feel hard, or like even like just like luxurious to like pull out from that. But every time they do, they're like, oh, thank God, I feel like I made like a break. I feel like I can think differently now about this thing that was really bothering me. So we do a lot of like peer-to-peer learning. We do exchanges as well. So like we recently had California and Virginia groups like exchanging to learn from each other in their canvases. So there's a lot of like learning that's happening across the country that I've been really happy to like make space for within the caucus.
Yeah.
I think like, whether you're in this caucus with us or in other places organizing or wherever you're doing your work, like being able to pull out of the day-to-day and look at the bigger picture ahead, I think it's important for everybody's strategy. Like, you can't just be building from moment to moment or year to year. Like, you've got to think like, where do I want to see this in 5 years? Where do I want to see this in 10 years? Because that's what's going to ultimately shift the tables. It's not going to be just winning the next thing,
Yeah. And I as somebody who has like worked in the sort of like non-profitized movement for a while, like I've been to many gatherings that are like executive directors and we have great conversations, and then it's like so hard to translate that to the day-to-day work, because it's like, well, as an executive director, like you maybe have some direct reports who are directors of departments, but then how do you generalize that? And that just like, you can't one person can't hold everything.
No.
In this work, that like there needs to be multiple voices and multiple perspectives on the kind of like deep strategic thinking that you're describing. Because like it strikes me that it is about building a different model of what it might look like to generate political vision. That like so much of the way I think conventionally we think about who creates a political vision is about an elected leader or the leader of an organization. But like, how do we model generating that vision in a way that is more inclusive, that is more like connected to the base? That feels really big to me.
Yeah, like what you're saying is it's essential leadership development, right? Is what I came in with, right? And wanted to think about, because I was an organizing director once upon a time. And I remember having these like questions that I wish like I could bounce off of somebody else who was doing similar work to me, but there wasn't a network, right? There wasn't like that kind of connection or being fostered or thought of. And for me, I am thinking about the bench, right? Like the folks who are executive directors right now of organizations in states are not going to be those forever. They're going to want to go do something else, right? And some of them do a great job of planning for when they're going to leave, and they build good leaders. And then some of them just don't, because of capacity or, like all these other pieces that come to interrupt that project. But it's an actual bucket of work that needs to be focused on, and not just to be like staffing a nonprofit, right? But also like to be elected leaders, to be a chief of staff, right? To be a board member in your local school board. Like, there's so many leadership positions that we need to have our folks in, that we have to be thinking about building the bench. So that's definitely another piece of work that the caucus thinks about, because we're really good at building our leaders from like the ground to a certain level. And then when they get to that kind of director level in a nonprofit, or maybe they ran for office once, they kind of get stuck there, right? And it's like, well, what's the next leap? How do we get them to the even higher strategic thinking? And so that's some of the stuff that we're thinking about as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I also think the thing you mentioned, that it's like building a leadership pipeline is not just about our organizations or like the organizations we think of as quote unquote the movement, but it is also like, where do we draw candidates from? Like, who are those people? How does like the experience people have in working in our organizations prepare them to do other things too? And that like, I don't know, I think that again, in the sort of like non-profitized space, that there's often a like focus on organizational development, but that like there's more than one route for any one individual through the landscape that we're in. And that like we do need champions who are willing to like take on the complex burden of running for office. Cause like that's just not easy. Like,
it's not. And we set our people up to fail. Like, especially for me as a woman of color, I've been asked to be in a lot of like leadership positions, right? And 5-10 years ago, being thrown into some leadership positions where I had no training, no coaching, set up really to fail, not intentionally, by very good people who wanted me to lead, but didn't have the capacity or really thought about like what it would take for someone to be successful in those positions. And so we lose people sometimes too, right? Through those actions. And so for me, like that leadership development piece is super key to how we build out a strong state infrastructure. Like strong organizations are part of it, but also like a strong C3 table, a strong C4 table, like all these things that make up the broader infrastructure, and having multiple people who can do those roles, like that's going to be the way to win too.
Totally. Well, I think too about like, I mean, here in the Bay Area, like we, a couple cycles ago, I mean, I guess this was at this point, damn near 10 years ago, convinced a local nonprofit leader who had worked in unions and community organizations to run for city council. She's my county supervisor now. And like, one of the things that I think she has been very good at, and then also the people and organizations that I've been a part of who also convinced her to run have been good at, is being like, we will show up for you when you do things that are maybe like gonna rub the real estate lobby the wrong way, because like it, like once you're in those seats, once you're in those like halls of power, the people who come knocking on your door are going to be different than the people who are just like, we're scheming at a coffee shop about how you should run for city council, because it's just a different vibe. Like
it is, and different motivations, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's about like, not like you're saying, not leaving our people behind when they do get in there, right? Like, because it's just not about winning the election. It's so much more after that,
Yeah, I wonder about like how we got stuck in that model of like,
it's a good question.
Like pulling people out, like elevating them to leadership, and then just being like, okay, you're good now. Like, good luck.
Right. We're gonna go back to knocking on doors.
Yeah, like what? Yeah. I don't know where that came from. I don't know why that is like the MO. And I'm glad to see it changing. But
I think it's changing a lot. I think at least in my lifetime as an organizer, the concept of organizing and mobilizing got very confused, right? And I do think that was some of the issue, because we started to forget about what true organizing looks like and how it's supposed to build to the future, and that mobilizing is a distinct part of it. We do need to mobilize at certain moments, but then the organizing comes after that, right? And it's like, okay, what do we do with all those high stake mobilization moments? They're meant to be temporary. They're not meant to be long and sustained, and organizing is long and sustained. And I feel like, we got caught up too in like the electoral cycles, right? Like, here's the next election, here's the midterms. In a state like Virginia, there's an election every year. So like every year you could live your calendar by the legislative session and the fall like electoral time. And you just keep following that cycle forever and ever and ever. And some people actually made the calculus that was going to build us power. Like some people really thought, right? Yeah. And I think a lot of funders went with that too, because, also it's very easy. It's easier to fund short term than it is long term, right?
So it's also easy to measure.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of things that seem really advantageous if what you care about is like how you report on it at the end of a calendar year.
Right. Exactly. Like, here's the numbers, here's what we won, here's what we didn't win. But ultimately we built something through that, but it wasn't enough to like deal with the conditions that we're in now.
Yeah. No, and I think that like it feels like a lot of the work that you all are doing, a lot of the work that like the way that Working Families Party is changing, the way that they're thinking about their work, that there is something afoot where people are trying to like really reckon with the, some mistakes that maybe we made over committing to that model, which is, I think, it's like the kind of thing where I'm like, I don't think this is about laying blame with anybody, but I do think it is about like modeling, like, let's take some responsibility for like how we did our work for the past however many cycles and see how we can shift that in the future.
Yeah, I think that's true. And like, like our state organizations have always bet that states are like the real battleground for the work, right? Like we've always been committed to that. But the call and the pull toward the national political space is strong, like it's re-emphasized by funding, it's re-emphasized by the media, like it's always been a strong pull. And so like you said, there's a lot of like missteps along the way, but I do think like the message about state power building and like the fact that so much of what happens gets born in the state level and in the local level and then can be brought up to the national when we do have power, right? But so much experimentation goes on at the local and state, and so much exciting wins are happening there.
Yeah.
Still, even in these conditions, still.
Totally.
You could just look at like the issue of abortion over the past few years, right? Ballot measures where people never thought something would pass. It was like, well, there it is. That's what people really think, right? When you look at the local and state, you can see what people really think and what really matters to them.
Yeah, like it's a way of demonstrating that is not mediated by people who professionally design polling for a living. Like
right. Exactly. It's just like the real sentiment of where the US, like the Americans are on these issues, and like it's not always pretty or perfect, but it's good to have like that intel, right? So yeah, I think we're definitely shifting. I hear more and more people talking about states and more people talking about building governing power, and those are all, I think, just real assessments of like where we have to go, where we need to commit money to in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it also strikes me that like some of this is about examining what the opposition has done too, right? That like I think the school board, the issue of finding good people to run for school boards is, I mean, it seems like a huge challenge because like it seems like a pretty like difficult job being stuck in between different constituencies in the voting public, and then teachers and staff unions, and then like like district administration. But that like this is something that the Christian far right has invested in order to make schools unwelcoming places for queer people. Like, and that like that is a leadership pipeline that they've invested in. So it makes sense that like we should be asking the question, like, what are the kinds of leadership pipelines that we would like to build? Not necessarily that they're necessarily directly in response in a like head-to-head sort of battle, but like what are things we can learn from that in our quest to build power?
Right. And ultimately, like they're pretty far ahead of us in that race, right? Like they realized at the local and the state level were these places where they could like experiment with their horrifying policies, right? And mimic them across the country. Again, I worked in reproductive justice, so the issues of abortion and birth control are very important to me, but also I have like a long view history of it. And that's some of the first fights that we had, right?
Yeah.
In local, those attacks. And I remember in 2015, trying to tell like other progressive, like left partners, like, please help us protect abortion. Like, please help us protect the right here to have birth control. Like, if they come after this, they're going to come after more things. This is just literally the beginning. It's the crux of bodily autonomy in so many ways. And like, and they came for it, and they've come for more, just like this, just like we said they would. So I feel like reproductive justice elders have always known like what was coming. And I think people see that now, right? Like how much they've been able to win, but the story's not over for us. There's still so much more to build and win and do. And ultimately, I always feel like on our end, like the people are with us, like whatever polling, whoever you talk to, whether you go out and knock doors, whatever, do phone banks, people still love progressive issues and ultimately believe in good progressive policy. And so we just have to organize them to get to that point and win.
Yeah. That feels such like a crucial point. And one of the things that like similarly that I've been like hearing a lot from people and thinking a lot about too is like everyday people who are busy, who are not us, right? Who are not like professional. We think about this 40 to 60 hours a week because it's our job. Regular people who are not those people don't necessarily have like a coherent ideological system.
No.
They want things to be better for themselves and their families and their kids and their neighbors and their parent, like whoever it might be. And that the job of organizing is about telling a coherent story that like the thing that we're trying to build here has a place for you and your folks in it.
Yes.
And that like the vision that we have is not about like this like titanic ideological battle. It is actually just like making it easier to be a working person in the United States of America.
Yes. And it's like a beautiful vision, right?
Yeah.
Like, articulate it and say it out loud. Like, it's not like people kidnapping your neighbors and your family members, right?
Yeah, it's not spending trillions of dollars on bombs. Like,
yeah, like it's not all this ugly shit that's everywhere, right? It's actually beautiful things that's going to make your life feel better and be able to spend time with your family and friends and whatever makes you happy, right? Like that's what it's about. But I think that narrative, that's another thing that comes up a lot within the caucus is a lack of like a cohesive progressive narrative that feels like really out there and that as states they can like adhere to like and cling on to, right, and string across the country together. That's something that is still really missing. And I know there's so many good like communicators like yourself and others that are thinking about that a lot. But yeah, I feel like we need more because it's just like it's lacking, like what our story of us is,
Yeah, and I mean, some of it is just that like we're not in practice, and some of it is like obviously structural. Where like, again, going back to that local news thing, I'm just like, I never watch. I mean, I don't own a television at this point, but whenever I'm like traveling, I will like sometimes switch on the like local cable news. And that shit's horrifying, man. Like I actually like don't know how. It's like one of those things where it's like I actually don't know how you organize against that kind of narrative infrastructure because it's
tough,
pervasive, and it is like pressing all the little buttons in our like animal brains about what is or is not safe.
That's so true. It gets reinforced all the time there.
Yeah. Big yikes.
Yes. I was just on a trip and turned the news on and was like, wow, this is ugly. Ooh.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's instructive, you know, like it really, I think, highlights how we have our work cut out for us if we take seriously this thing that you were saying about organizing being about helping people make sense of the world.
Yes.
Because the sense that people have been making for most people in the United States for decades now is, it's this law and order bullshit. It's like really invested in like systems of death. So
yes, and isolationism, right? Like our people are more alone than ever, right? Like so afraid of each other, like even within our most organized bases, like, organizers still have to like combat that fear of each other, right? That comes up. And so like, that's a real issue. And I feel like the only antidote to that is organizing. It's more people being in community with each other, right? And like, knowing your neighbor, right? And knowing like that, your immigrant neighbor is a person, maybe, like they're just not, they don't deserve to be kidnapped, right? They don't deserve like terrible things happening to them. And you should help them out. You should look out for them, like see where they're at, that's just that empathy is missing too. I think it's a tough time.
It is a tough time. Tough time for a lot of people for a lot of reasons.
Yes, for a lot of people for a lot of reasons.
Well, to that end, to fight that isolation, what can folks listening do to get involved with this kind of power building work? You mentioned that you have organizations in a variety of states, but if you were starting from like, I care about this stuff, I've been thinking about it, how do I like get into the organized space of an organization? Where would you go? What would you do?
Definitely like support, like if you can support by being part of like an organization, right? Like being a part of like actions and activities that are happening, support monetarily by donating, right? If that's not something you have time to do, if you have the ability to do, but joining state power building organizations that are actually thinking about the long haul. So not just like the folks that are just like, oh, come to this rally or something, but more like someone who comes to your door and knocks on it and asks like, what do you think about blah, blah, blah. Find out more about that organization because likely they're building the long haul infrastructure that we need. And like try to support monetarily, like for folks that are watching this, like if you have any way to like donate, right? Like resourcing the build side of Block and Build, which is really where SPC lives. We do the build part, which can be kind of nebulous because I feel like we know what Block looks like in a lot of ways, and we're very much in the blocking of authoritarianism. But being able to like resource organizing and leadership, even being like a mentor to folks that want to lead, right? So like whether you're in like an organization or not, like just being able to mentor folks to be growing those leadership skills is really important. Paying attention to your local and state politics, like please, like if you are not plugged in yet or locked into what is happening at your county level, oftentimes that is very aligned with what's going down in your state. So like pay attention, go out to that lobby day. Like those things are important, and you can have influence pretty easily, like if you just show up to a couple of meetings locally. Like I got some speed humps in front of my house.
Nice.
Because people like to go really fast across here, and I've got kids and there's other kids here, and they just shouldn't be going fast. So
why are you speeding in neighborhood? Slow the fuck down.
I just had to show up to a few things, and that happened. So
yeah,
it can happen. And that can be a good change for like all people, right? And so just like remembering to like, we're in this for the long haul. Like there's so much bad shit out there. Try to like not consume that much, like put the phone down, scroll. Like I need to take that advice myself.
Look, sometimes the advice you give other people is the hardest advice for you.
It is. It totally is. But it's still good advice, right? Like it's still good. Yeah. Like put it down. If you have the privilege to step away from the negativity and the things that are meant to make us feel down and out, and to feel like that's what authoritarianism does, right? It purposely wants you to feel like you can't win, like we can't do this. And I always remember that like we can, and like people do believe in our issues, and people want their communities to be good and safe and healthy. And like that's ultimately what we're trying to do. So yeah, just keep hope.
Well, thanks so much, Margie. It's always a delight to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. Thank you.
My thanks again to Margie for joining me for this interview. There's a link in the show notes for you to connect with State Power Caucus and learn more about the work that they might be doing in your state. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Caden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstro. Editorial support this week was provided by Akin Ola. Kimmy David designed our cover art. And if you have something to say, please drop me a line. You can send me an email that we'll consider running on an upcoming mailbag episode at mailbag@convergencemag.com. And of course, if you would like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, you can become a member at convergencemag.com/donate. Even a few bucks a month goes a long way to making sure our independent small team can continue to build a map for our movements. I hope this helps.